Dean Martin died on Christmas Day 1995. The history books will tell you that his heart finally gave out in his Beverly Hills home, surrounded by the silence he had come to crave. The obituaries listed his movies, his songs, his jokes, and his legendary coolness. They spoke of emphysema and old age. But his friends knew the truth. They knew that the man who died in 1995 was just a shell, a ghost haunting a body that had forgotten how to live. The real Dean Martin, the man who laughed, the man who loved, the man who lit up every room he entered, actually died 8 years earlier on a snowy mountainside in California. He died on March 21, 1987. The day a telephone call brought him to his knees and ripped the soul right out of his chest. What the world didn't know was this. In the weeks before that fatal flight, Dino Jr. had called his father 3 times, asking him to pull strings to get him transferred to a desk job. He was getting married soon. He wanted to start a family. He was thinking about his future. And Dean, proud of his son's service, proud of the uniform, had laughed it off each time. "You're a Martin," he'd said. "We don't quit. We finish what we start." Those words would haunt him for the rest of his life. The Golden Boy. To understand the magnitude of the tragedy that destroyed Dean Martin, you first have to understand the bond he shared with his son, Dean Paul Martin, known to the world and his family simply as Dino Jr. In the constellation of the Martin family, Dino was the brightest star. He was everything Dean was and everything Dean wanted to be. Handsome, talented, athletic, and possessed of that same effortless charm that made his father a legend. Dino was the Golden Boy. He was a tennis pro who played at Wimbledon in 1981. He was an actor who starred in movies like Players and TV shows like Misfits of Science. He was a musician in the rock band Dino, Desi, and Billy, named after himself, Desi Arnaz Jr., and their friend Billy Hinchy. But more than all of that, he was a pilot. And not just any pilot. He was a captain in the California Air National Guard, flying F-4 Phantom jets, the same aircraft that had dominated the skies over Vietnam. At 35 years old, with over 3,000 flight hours logged, Dino was considered one of the best pilots in his squadron. Here's what the documentaries don't tell you. Dino had survived 3 emergency landings in his career. He'd lost an engine over the Pacific in 1984 and glided his jet back to base on a single turbine. His commanding officer had recommended him for commendation. He was skilled, he was careful, he was professional. Which made what happened on March 21st all the more impossible to accept. To Dean, who would spend his life pretending to be a drunk on stage while secretly being a dedicated family man, Dino was his validation. He was the proof that Dean had done something right in this crazy world. They were more than father and son. They were best friends. They played golf together every Sunday morning at the Riviera Country Club. They cracked jokes together in Italian, the language of Dean's childhood that he taught his son. They understood each other in a way that didn't require words. Dean, a man who famously kept everyone at arm's length, who built a wall of cool around himself that no one could penetrate, lowered the drawbridge for Dino. Dino was the only one who truly saw the man behind the tuxedo. From Jean Martin's perspective, Dean's second wife and Dino's mother, the relationship was even deeper. She would later tell friends that Dean saw in Dino everything he'd wanted to be but couldn't because of the era he grew up in. Dean had been forced to drop out of school in 10th grade to work in a steel mill. Dino had gone to college. Dean had anglicized his name and hidden his Italian heritage to get work. Dino embraced both sides of his identity proudly. Dean lived vicariously through that boy, Jean said in a rare 1998 interview. When Dino succeeded, Dean felt like he'd succeeded as a father. And when Dino died, Dean felt like he'd failed at the only thing that ever really mattered to him.
The funeral was held on March 28, 1987, at the Los Angeles National Cemetery. It was a blur of black limousines, weeping celebrities, and full military honors. A folded American flag, the sound of taps played on a lonely bugle, a missing man formation, 4 F-4 Phantoms flying overhead, one peeling away to symbolize the fallen pilot. Dean Martin was there physically, but spiritually he was miles away. He moved like a robot. He wore his dark glasses, not to look cool, but to hide eyes that were swollen and dead. From Frank Sinatra's private journal, published after his death, "Saw Dean at the funeral today. I've known this man for 35 years. I've seen him happy, angry, drunk, sober, in love, heartbroken, but I've never seen him empty. That's what he looked like today. Empty, like someone had reached inside and scooped out everything that made him Dean. He didn't cry, he didn't speak. He just stood there like a statue. After the service, I tried to hug him. He didn't hug back. His arms just hung at his sides. I said, 'I'm here for you, Dag.' He looked at me, through me, really, and said, I should have told him not to fly. Then he walked away. That was the last real conversation we ever had." People tried to comfort him. He died a hero, they said. He died serving his country, they said. He didn't suffer, they said. Dean nodded politely, but he didn't hear them. All he could hear was the silence where his son's laugh used to be. All he could see was the telephone call he'd dismissed 3 weeks earlier when Dino asked about transferring out of flying status. At the graveside, Dean looked older than his 69 years. The vitality that had defined him was gone, replaced by a gray, hollow fragility. He touched the casket, a gentle, lingering touch, as if he were tucking Dino in for the night one last time. Witnesses say he whispered something, but no one knows for sure what it was. Maybe it was, "I love you." Maybe it was, "I'm sorry." Maybe it was, "Wait for me." Captain Ramon Ortiz's widow, Patricia, would later say, "Dean came to me after the service. He took my hands and he said, 'Your husband was a hero. My son was lucky to fly with him.' I told him it wasn't his fault, that accidents happen. He just shook his head and walked away. I think Dean blamed himself. I think he carried that guilt until the day he died." The slow death that followed. After the funeral, Dean retreated into his fortress on Mountain Drive. He shut the gates. He stopped returning calls. He stopped going out to dinner with the gang. The world wanted Dean Martin back, but Dean Martin didn't want the world. He felt betrayed by life. He had played by the rules. He had worked hard, provided for his family, entertained millions. And this was his reward? To bury his child? It made no sense. It was a cruel joke. And for the first time in Dean's life, Dean didn't find the joke funny. For Mort Viner, Dean's longtime manager and best friend, he changed completely after Dino died. The Dean I knew, the guy who loved golf, loved his work, loved being around people, that guy was gone. This new Dean, he was a shadow. He'd sit in his house all day watching old westerns on a loop. I'd call him, "Dean, let's go play 9 holes." He'd say, "Not today, Mort." Every day was not today. Eventually, I stopped calling. What could I do? I couldn't bring his son back. He began to shed the trappings of his stardom. He didn't care about the records. He didn't care about the ratings. He didn't care about the legend. He sat in his room watching old westerns, The Searchers, Rio Bravo, The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance over and over and over. Why westerns? Because in westerns, the good guys won. In westerns, death had a reason, a purpose. In westerns, the world was simple, black hats and white hats, showdowns at high noon, justice always served. The complex, painful reality of 1987 was too much to bear. He became a ghost in his own life, drifting from room to room, carrying the heavy, invisible burden of grief that pressed down on his shoulders like the granite of San Gorgonio.
A year later, in 1988, Frank Sinatra and Sammy Davis Jr. tried to save him. They saw their friend fading away, dying of a broken heart, and they came up with a plan, a massive reunion tour. Together again, the Rat Pack back on stage, filling stadiums, reliving the glory days. Frank thought the applause would heal Dean. He thought the music, the lights, the crowds would bring him back to life. Frank was wrong. Frank didn't understand that Dean didn't want to be healed. He just wanted to be left alone with his grief. But Dean, ever the loyal friend, agreed to the tour. He didn't want to let Frank and Sammy down. They'd been brothers for 30 years. The tour started on March 13, 1988, in Oakland, California. Opening night, Dean walked on stage to thunderous applause, 20,000 people cheering his name. And he looked lost. He stood there in his tuxedo, under the hot lights, and you could see it in his eyes. He didn't want to be there. He was doing it out of obligation, out of loyalty, but his heart wasn't in it. He would forget lyrics to songs he'd sung 1,000 times. He would flick his cigarette ashes onto the stage floor with a look of utter disdain. The old magic, the timing, the spark, it was gone. From Sammy Davis Jr.'s autobiography, published in 1989, Dean was sleepwalking through the shows. We'd be on stage, 20,000 people loving us, and Dean looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. One night in Seattle, he forgot the words to Everybody Loves Somebody, his biggest hit, just stood there, staring into the lights. Frank and I covered for him, but it was painful to watch. After the show, I asked him, "What's wrong, Dean?" He said, "I keep thinking about Dino. He should be here. He should be alive." What do you say to that? He looked at the audience and saw thousands of strangers who wanted him to be funny, who wanted him to be Dino, to do the drunk routine, to crack wise, and his heart was bleeding. He felt like a clown performing at a funeral. In Chicago, on April 3, 1988, it reached a breaking point. Halfway through the show, during That's Amore, Dean turned to Frank on stage and mumbled, "I want to go home." Frank tried to push him, tried to rally him. "Come on, Dag, let's knock 'em dead." But Dean had nothing left to give. He threw his cigarette down, walked off the stage mid-song, and went straight to the airport. He flew home to Los Angeles that night, leaving the tour, leaving the money, leaving the legend behind. He checked into Cedars-Sinai Medical Center the next day, officially for kidney problems, but everyone knew the truth. It was a soul problem. He was done. He had tried to be Dean Martin one last time for his friends, but the mask wouldn't stick anymore. It slid off his face, revealing the grieving father underneath. That night in Chicago was the last time the real Rat Pack ever existed. Frank Sinatra never forgave himself for pushing Dean to do the tour. In his final years, Frank would tell friends, "I should have let him grieve in peace. I thought I was helping, but I was just making him dance on his son's grave." The final years, a man waiting for death. The final 7 years of Dean Martin's life were a study in solitude. He didn't become a recluse in the crazy Howard Hughes sense. He just became a man who was finished with the noise. He established a quiet routine. Every evening at 6 p.m., he would put on his tuxedo or a sports coat, always dressing for dinner out of habit and self-respect, and drive himself to his favorite Italian restaurant, usually La Famiglia on North Cannon Drive, sometimes Da Vinci in Beverly Hills. He would sit at the same table, table 8, in the back corner where he could see the door. The staff knew not to disturb him.
They would bring him his pasta e fagioli, his bread, his glass of red wine. And often Dean would have them set a place setting for the empty chair opposite him. Some said he was waiting for Frank. Others whispered he was waiting for a woman, a secret love. But those who knew him understood. That empty chair was for Dino. From Tony, the maitre d' at La Familia, in a 2003 interview, Mr. Martin would come in every night, same time, same table. He'd order 2 meals, his pasta e fagioli and a plate of lasagna, which he'd place across from him. He'd sit there for hours, eating slowly, sipping his wine, staring into the middle distance, lost in a conversation that only he could hear. Fans would sometimes approach him, nervous, asking for an autograph. Dean would always be polite. He would sign the napkin, smile that sleepy smile, and say, "You're welcome, pal." But the eyes were vacant. They were the eyes of a man who was just waiting for the check so he could go home. The psychological analysis of what Dean was experiencing. Dr. Alan Wolfelt, a leading grief counselor, reviewed Dean's case in 2010 and diagnosed what's known as complicated grief or prolonged grief disorder. Dean Martin was experiencing what we call arrested development in the grieving process. He never moved past the yearning and searching phase. The empty chair, the one-sided conversations, these are classic signs of someone who refuses to accept the finality of death. Dean was living in 2 worlds simultaneously, the real world where his son was dead, and the world in his mind where Dino was just late for dinner. He spent his days watching TV, mostly westerns and golf tournaments, playing golf until he became too weak, and sleeping. He wasn't sad in a dramatic, weeping way anymore. He was just absent. He was serving out his time. He was a prisoner of existence, waiting for parole. He missed his friends. Sammy died in 1990, and that was another blow, another member of his found family gone. But mostly he missed the boy on the mountain. He told Mort Viner once in 1993, "I'm not afraid of dying. Why should I be? Everyone I love is already there." It was a profound statement of faith and fatigue. The king of cool had become a monk of grief, finding a strange comfort in his loneliness. Christmas Day, 1995. And then the end finally came. It was Christmas Day, a poetic date for a man who had made Marshmallow World and Baby It's Cold Outside holiday anthems. Dean Martin lay in his bed at 363 Copa de Oro Road. His breathing was shallow. The emphysema caused by a lifetime of cigarettes, 3 packs a day for 50 years, had claimed his lungs. His kidneys were failing. His liver was scarred. But it was the grief that had claimed his will to breathe. He was 87 years old. His daughter, Deanna, was with him. She held his hand. She told him it was okay to let go. As the world outside celebrated, opening presents, singing carols, children laughing, Dean Martin closed his eyes for the last time. There was no struggle, no panic, just a gentle exhaling, a final release of the burden he had carried for 8 years, 8 months, and 8 days. The silence he had sought for so long finally embraced him completely. From Deanna Martin's memoir, published in 2004, "In his final moments, Dad smiled. I hadn't seen him really smile since Dino died, but there at the end he smiled, and he whispered something. I leaned in close, and I heard him say, 'I see him. He's there. He's waiting.' Then he was gone. I like to think he finally found peace. I like to think he and Dino are together again, playing golf on some celestial course, laughing at jokes only they understand." When the news broke on December 26, 2005, the lights on the Las Vegas Strip were dimmed for 10 minutes in his honor. The marquees went dark. 20,000 tourists stood in silence on the Strip,
watching the lights go down for the King of Cool.
The Unseen Consequences, 30 years later. The legacy of that March day in 1987 extends far beyond Dean Martin's broken heart. Captain Ramon Ortiz's family, his daughter, Elena, who was only 6 when he died, grew up with the weight of that tragedy. She became an aerospace safety engineer, specifically to prevent accidents like the one that killed her father and Dino Jr. In 2007, she helped design the Terrain Awareness Warning System upgrade that has saved an estimated 400 pilots' lives. "My father's death wasn't in vain," she said in 2017, on the 30th anniversary. "Every pilot who lands safely because of better warning systems, that's my father's legacy. That's Dino's legacy." The California Air National Guard. After the crash, they instituted new weather minimums for training flights. If conditions are remotely questionable, the flight is scrubbed. No exceptions. Since 1987, not a single Guard pilot has been killed in a weather-related training accident in California. Dean's grandchildren. Dino Jr.'s son, Alexander Martin, was only 15 when his father died. He never flew in his life, too traumatized by what happened. But his sister, Jessica, became a naval aviator. "I fly for my dad," she said. "He loved the sky. I want to honor that." The mountain itself. At the crash site, at coordinates 34 degrees 5 minutes north, 116 degrees 52 minutes west, there's now a small memorial. Hikers who make the difficult trek to 8,500 feet find a bronze plaque. Captain Dean Paul Martin, Captain Ramon Ortiz, March 21, 1987. They touched the sky. Every year on March 21st, members of the 163rd Fighter Wing fly a missing man formation over San Gorgonio. Dean's family attends, so does Ramon's. They remember together. Modern parallel. In 2020, Kobe Bryant, his daughter Gianna, and 7 others died in a helicopter crash in Calabasas, California, just 40 miles from where Dino's jet went down. The circumstances were eerily similar: bad weather, spatial disorientation, a pilot trying to navigate through clouds. Like Dean Martin, Vanessa Bryant lost her husband and her child in an instant. Like Dean, she had to navigate grief in the public eye. The two families connected through that shared, unspeakable pain. Deanna Martin reached out to Vanessa with a simple message: "You will survive this, but you'll never be the same, and that's okay." The lesson. The tragic irony of Dean Martin's life is that he spent 40 years trying to make us laugh. He perfected an image of effortless cool, a man who didn't care about anything too deeply, who glided through life on charm and a wink. But his story ended in tears. Yet in that tragedy, there is a beautiful, terrible lesson. It teaches us that fame is nothing. Money is dust. Awards are just metal and plastic. The screaming crowds, the hit records, the sold-out shows, all of it is meaningless noise. The only thing that truly matters, the only thing that can break a man like Dean Martin, is love. He loved his son so much that he couldn't survive without him. And that, in its own heartbreaking way, is the most noble legacy of all. The psychological truth. Dean Martin's story reminds us that grief has no timeline. Society wants us to move on, to find closure, to be strong. But real grief, the kind that loses you a child, doesn't work that way. It becomes part of you. It changes your DNA. You don't get over it. You just learn to carry it. Dean never learned to carry it. He dragged it behind him like chains for 8 years until it finally pulled him under. And maybe that's okay. Maybe some loves are so pure, so deep, that losing them should destroy you.
Maybe Dean's long, slow death was proof of how much he loved his son. Maybe the greatest tribute a father can give is to be so devastated by the loss of his child that he ceases to exist without them. So, the next time you hear That's Amore playing in an Italian restaurant, or Everybody Loves Somebody on an oldies station, don't just hear the jokes and the Italian charm. Listen to the voice. Really listen. Listen to the warmth and the longing. Remember the man who died of a broken heart on a snowy mountain. Remember the father who spent his last years staring at an empty chair, setting an extra place at the table, waiting for his boy to come home. Remember that behind every smile there's pain, behind every laugh there's pain, and behind the coolest man who ever lived there was just a dad who missed his son. In 2025, almost 30 years after the crash, a new generation is discovering Dean Martin through TikTok, through memes, through vinyl records at vintage shops. They see the swagger, the style, the timeless cool, but they don't know about March 21, 1987. They don't know about the empty chair. They don't know that the man who sang about love and laughter died of both. This is his real story, not the Vegas legend, not the Rat Pack mythology, just a father and son separated by a mountain, reunited in eternity. Rest in peace, Dino Jr. You finally got your wings. Rest in peace, Dean. You finally found your boy. And somewhere in a place beyond the clouds, where F4 phantoms don't crash and fathers don't bury sons, they're together again, laughing at inside jokes, playing golf under an endless sky, making up for 8 years of missed dinners. That's amore.